Okay.
See, where are we?
Well, let's, how long were you in Japan the
Okay,
first
at that time?
Yeah.
Okay. We went home in 1953 for a year, during which time my husband got his master's in Bible at Harding University. And my daughters went to first grade and fourth grade at that time there. And he went also around different churches preaching about the work in Japan on Sundays, on the weekends. And then we went back in the fall of 54. I think that's right. No, we left, fall of 54. And he felt like that the church had grown so quickly, and we had so many very well qualified men, highly qualified men, to lead the church. He felt like he should not lead any longer, but he wanted to stay around to see, to help train them and to watch what they did. So he went out to the Far East Air Force at Haneda Air Base and got a job as the education director there. And so he had a lot of free time, though. It wasn't he just had to, find the teachers and set up the courses, and they taught the courses and everything. So it wasn't a very demanding job. So he still was able to do a lot for the church and have a lot of free time. And so Mori-san had just graduated, Yukiya Mori had graduated from college and wanted to be a lawyer, and he decided that he'd not be a lawyer, but he wanted to preach. And so we hired him as the preacher.
What size was the congregation at that time?
I guess we had about 200, maybe. Well, it never did get over 200. We had 200 Japanese in the morning, and then we had about 100 military people in the afternoon that met. So
were there a lot of other Christian churches that had started after the war?
Yes,
different denominations and things.
And also the mainline church had one in Yokohama that our friends, the Collis and Dolores Campbell, they preached with an elderly gentleman named of E.A. Rhodes, who'd come here also before the war. And then up in Ibaraki, there were quite a few churches had been started before the war, and when the war was over, they revived. Some that Brother McCaleb and Barney Moorhead, quite a few people had started churches up in Ota and some of those places up there that were still in existence. They went underground during the war and then opened up again after the war.
Did any of those churches get larger than 200?
No, no.
What about denominational churches?
The denominational churches were, because of the war, they all were supposed to be united, and so they had what they call the United Church, and they lost their identity as a Presbyterian, Lutheran, or whatever, because they all had to unite. And so those were the churches that were meeting at the time, was the United Church of Christ.
Were any of those very large at all?
The largest one was, they had a school, and most of them would have kindergartens. So it was kind of hard to tell because they would start kindergartens for the children, and then they would have activities at the church, and the people would come, but they wouldn't be members, so it was kind of hard. And also, they had a practice of counting a person a member if they sent their contribution. You didn't have to go, but if you were on the rolls and you sent your contribution in regularly,
right.
Like even here at this church, they had people through the years that were counted as members who lived all different places, but because they sent in their contribution, they were on the roll.
Right.
And that's a vital point when we get to when we came back.
But the attendances at denominational churches, did they ever get much over 200 either?
I guess the biggest one was the Tokyo Baptist Church. And I don't think because when Takeshi was married in that building, and I don't think it held over 200 from my memory. It's been a few years ago, but I don't think they could have got more than that there.
Right.
But I don't know where they get their statistics, but they have statistics on churches, you know. And this congregation here is the largest in the history of any religious activity in Japan.
Right.
It's already passed the goal. Last year, I think it was, that they passed.
The
became
Tokyo Church of Christ.
Tokyo Church of Christ.
The largest ever.
Ever in the history of Christianity in Japan.
Right. Were there any Pentecostal churches?
I think there's some. The missionaries of all the different churches got together in an area which was called Church World Service. They bought food for us to bring into Japan because we couldn't buy, there was no American food at that time. And so we got to meet a lot of the missionaries through this Church World Service. And I don't remember now what the different denominations represented were.
Do you remember if there were Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and was
The
that
Mormons,
much of a presence?
well, you know, when this article that they wrote about mission work being the Mount Everest, Japan being the Mount Everest of mission work, when they wrote that article, two of the people they talk about were the Mormons who came, and they'd been here for a couple of years and had not converted anybody, I believe. I can't remember. Steve has that article, copy of it, and I don't remember exactly the statistics on it.
Right.
So they were here.
Right.
And they also gave the church a bad name. I've learned from different people that we've converted that, like in Kanagawa, they have several Mormon churches there now even. And because they say don't go to shows and don't drink coffee and don't do this and everything, they give Christianity a bad name, according to the Japanese. They don't like that.
Yeah.
And so they don't grow very fast.
Okay. So when you came back again in '54, how long did you stay here
We
again?
were here for 3 years then, till '57. And during that time, we appointed elders, and Mori-san was a preacher.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You okay? Probably just blew his ears out. Sorry about that.
So,
So you appointed elders during that time?
yes, yeah.
And then
Inamata-san was one of the elders, and we had a doctor. Takata-san was an elder. Shota-san was an elder. And we had a couple named Miyagi. He and his wife, of course.
And who was the preacher?
Yukio Mori was the preacher.
Okay.
Takata-san preached for a little while we were gone, but then we came back. Mori-san was the preacher, and then soon after, he got married after we got back too.
Was the thinking at that time that the elders were the ones really in charge of the church?
Yes. And because in '53, when we went back to the States, my husband took his first trip to visit other missionaries, which he kept up through the years. But he went to visit the missionaries in Africa and different places and found out that the churches that grew the fastest were the churches that supported themselves. They had native preachers, and they ran their own program, and they also would support themselves. And so he was a firm believer in that at the time. And so he also had read a book that influenced him by Roland Allen on about starting
churches.
Yes, about being indigenous and starting churches in all over like Acts did and so forth. Like follow the book of Acts, go to large cities and so forth. Let them spread out from there. And that's what he taught later on when he began teaching. So he visited the churches to see how they're growing and why not, and found that those churches that were self-supporting and had their own native preachers, they were growing the fastest. Right. And so that's what he wanted the Tokyo church to do. Right. And so he helped by being there, but they made all the decisions, and the elders really took care of everything.
And then you returned to the U.S. in 1957?
57, yeah.
And he went to do his doctoral work at that time?
Well, first of all, he preached at Fred Hardeman College in Tennessee. He was the head of the speech department there, and some of the, at that time, Yukio Mori and Dr. Takata and Yosho Inamata all came back to the States to go to our Christian colleges to learn more Bible. And so they were at, Yosho was at Fried Hardeman with us, and then Mori-san and Takata-san went to Harding University. Takata-san already had his PhD in medicine. He was a doctor with a PhD in medicine, but he took the Bible courses. And Mori-san did the graduate Bible course. And Yosho just took courses just to take them because he already had a degree from college here in Japan. But he was a singer. So,
Oh, really?
And one thing that we did when we started, which I didn't mention, is we had a quartet who sang, and we had a radio program every Sunday. Inamata-san preached, and his son had a quartet who sang, and we had a lot of people come through that program, besides our door knocking.
Right.
In our camp.
So then you were in Fried Hardeman.
Yes,
and then
for 1 year only.
Take us through the next years fairly quickly until the Boston years.
He taught at Fried Hardeman, and meanwhile, in the summer, went up to Moody Institute in Chicago, took some courses, and then when we first married, he'd gotten a master's in speech from Syracuse University, and the head of the speech department then was Dr. Oliver. Meanwhile, Dr. Oliver became head of the speech department at Penn State University, and he went up for the summer to take a couple of courses, and Dr. Oliver convinced him to come back and get his doctorate, and said he would tailor-make a course in the speech department on cross-cultural communication for him so that he could get a degree, a PhD in cross-cultural communication. So he's the first person in America, in the world, to get a cross-cultural PhD in cross-cultural communication, and the first one to teach it. And he took cultural anthropology and non-Christian religions and all those kinds of courses. And so when he graduated in '62, we came to move to Memphis, and he taught at Harding Graduate School there. And quite a few of those students are now part of the movement. And because they were in his classes that time, they came up there when we came. And then
would I know some of those people?
Tom Jones is one. And well, Andy Fleming, he took the courses at at Abilene. And there's quite a few of them. Can't remember them all now. Can't remember even where they are. Then he was in Memphis for 6 years and started the missions department there, took his students to different countries, after having a summer program where they could get 6 hours credit, and we had a chapel for the missionaries. Then he would take students to 2 different countries or go around the world, and they'd work with missionaries. He did that every year for the next nearly 20 years. And first from Harding, then we moved to Abilene Christian University, and
Did he begin the missions department at Harding?
Yes,
Was that was the first time they had one?
Yes,
And at Abilene also?
And at Abilene too, and the summer missions seminars. He had the first one of those at Searcy. We moved to Searcy and had the program there first summer. And no, we had first summer in Memphis, second summer there. And so anyway, during that time, of course, he was teaching, about missions and preaching, just all the time about the fact that we need to evangelize the world in our generation. And we had a lot of missionaries go out at that time. It was a very, very, when he was at Harding, a lot of missionaries went. And then gradually, after we went to Abilene, he started the missions department there. And it grew, till we had 15 people on staff there. And mission strategy room and all, to teach missions. Went and did workshops at all the different congregations. But at that time, he came back to Tokyo. I think he came back to Tokyo almost every summer for at least a week or two to see how things were going. And Morrison, he also talked to Morrison. He brought Inamada-san over to teach some classes at Abilene, at our seminar in Abilene. So we kept a contact with them all the time. And he would go see how things were going. They were going well. Camp was going well. They were converting people there. Then, I guess about the middle of the years, we went to Abilene in 1968. He retired in 1982. So we were there, what, is that 14 years? Yeah, 14 years. And during that time, he would still go back to Tokyo to see how things were going. But anyway, then Mori-san left and moved to California to work for the church, West Side Church at Los Angeles, which was completely Japanese. His wife was not happy in Japan, him being the preacher, and so in order to keep his marriage intact, they moved to LA where she could do some things she wanted to do and he could, preach for them. So we had some of the teachers from Ibaraki Christian College, they invited them down to speak for them. And they had several preachers at that time. And then when he retired, he went back to Tokyo for 1 month, the month of September, to see how the church was going and to meet with the young leaders and so forth. And they seemed to be doing fine. Everything they told him seemed to be fine. But it really wasn't what was going on, which we found out later. But they wanted him to retire. All this time, he was what they call the Shukyo, the Daihyo Yakuin, which is the board of trustees of the churches is called the Shukyo Hojin, and the person that is the head of it is called the Daihyo Yakuin. And so he was still head with a representative all these years. Judge Inamada would never let him retire, would not let him give that up. He felt like that he needed to stay there because in Japanese culture, the person that's head of the Shukyo Hojin he can change doctrine even if he wants to. He can do anything. He's really in charge. He has complete charge of authority over everything. And he felt like that it would stay a church of Christ if he were always there, that nobody could change it. And so he felt very strongly about him staying there. Also, meanwhile, some other things had happened that we didn't know, and so he wanted him to stay there. So, let's see, I guess we had different people go. For instance, our daughter, when my daughter and her husband graduated from Harding University in '69, they went over. We had programs that we called by different names, where young people fresh out of college would go and work with a missionary for a year just to help them, just to be helpmates. And then they would know whether they wanted to be missionary or not after having gone through this 1 year doing something like that, or 2 years. We called it a youth corps. And so people would be invited to do that. So my oldest daughter and her husband, who went to Texas, University of Texas, working on a PhD in Japanese, they went back to Japan for him to work on his thesis, and took my granddaughter, who was kindergarten age then, so she went to kindergarten and learned Japanese at that time. Family, you don't want all the family stuff, right? Even though they went over there, I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, I'd love
then
to.
later on, they worked. Then my youngest daughter and her husband spent 1.5 years there, and my granddaughter was born there. And they worked with the church for a while. They went up to camp and helped the camp program, did Sunday school work and things like that. And then came back to the States. And then later on, my oldest daughter and her husband went back, and he preached for the church for a while. Right after Mori-san left, for about 2 years, he preached there in Japanese, because his Japanese was good. And my granddaughter went to 3rd and 4th grade at that time.
So now you guys went into retirement.
Yeah,
Did somebody
so-
have to persuade you to go into retirement?
No, we were ready.
You were ready. And you retired in Missouri?
In 1981, my husband handed over the missions department to one of his one of the people that worked with him, one he thought would really do a great job. And because he had chaired so many theses, we went ahead and moved up to Missouri, where we had bought a home to retire in, and on a lake. And for the month of September, he came to Japan and worked with the young leaders that were here, talking about they wanted to sell the property and build a big building and then have the church meet on one floor and rent out the top floors for offices. And he said if the whole congregation agreed to that, then he would agree to it. Well, he never heard from him anymore about doing that. But meanwhile, in December, he had a gallbladder attack and had to have his gallbladder removed. And so from January to April, for that spring semester, he didn't get to go back to Abilene to teach that spring because he wasn't well enough to go at the time. So we went back in May of '82, and at that time they had his retirement ceremony. And so then we went up to our house and we worked on it, and he preached. There was a little church there made up of people who'd retired from all different places, and so he preached part-time for them and worked on building making our house more livable, and going around preaching at different places once in a while. And that's all he wanted to do right then, because he was tired. He had not had a vacation in years because he always took the students everywhere, and it was a big job doing that. And so when Richard Reinbold met him, he was asked to come to preach in Ohio at one of the college universities there when they had a big seminar there, and I guess it was from Gainesville. People came from Gainesville. And so they asked him to speak on the program, and Jerry Jones was also on the same program. And Richard told my husband, he was there too, because he lived in Ohio at the time. And he'd been one of our students. So Richard Reinbold's one of them. He was a student all the way through the mission seminars at Harding and everything. And so was his wife and his daughter. So Richard told my husband that in Boston that they were doing a lot of things. They were really in earnest about the evangelism of the world. And so he thought that he should go up and check it out. He said, well, he was happy where he was, and he said, I can't believe anything exciting's happened in Boston, because when we were in Syracuse, New York, we were there for 9 years, he had gone to Boston a number of times and saw the little churches that were there, and usually the preacher was somebody who was going to get their degree at Harvard or something, and they didn't grow. And so he thought there can't be anything there. So, and Kip had come to one of our mission seminars, and he heard my husband preach, God evangelize the world in this generation. And he knew that he had this mission seminar and that he went on mission trips all the time. So he knew where his heart was. And so when Richard got back went to Boston for something or other, he told Kip that my husband had retired and that he felt like he should come up to Boston. So Kip called him and said, George, this is where you need to be. You will love it up here. And he said, well, I can't believe anything much is going on up there, but he said, well, would you come and just hold one of your weekends seminars that you do? And so he said, well, my wife and I were just getting ready to take our grandchildren on a historic tour through the Northeast, and so he said that's when we were coming, but he said, I can fly up, and then Irene can drive our granddaughters up to New York, and I'll fly back to New York and meet them there, and we'll go on our trip from there. So that's what we decided to do. So he went there for the weekend. Well, the first day he was there, he got so excited. He called me and he told me what was going on. He just couldn't believe, the elders and everybody really putting missions first. He couldn't believe that they were doing that, because meanwhile, in his teaching, the mission work had dwindled and people got, very materialistic, and they were just really, did I hit something?
No, the kids. Can you hear the kids?
No, it's okay.
It's okay? Okay. Yeah, if you could just ask them if they can.
So
Okay.
he was,
Rolling?
in his final speech that he made to the missions teachers program, that we had mission teachers come from all the colleges every year in February for a seminar together. He said that we can teach all we want to college students about how to do mission work, all the cross-cultural communication, all those things, but until one church decides that it really is a priority to win the world for Christ, we're never going to get anywhere. That was his final speech that he made. And then he got to Boston. He saw the one church that was doing it, and he was blown away. It was exactly what he said needed to happen. And so we talked about it on the whole trip, with the girls about, that all he could talk about was what was going on there. So Kip asked him to come back to the seminar in the fall and to teach at the seminar. So
Which year was that?
that was 83.
83.
And so we came back in 83, and we were blown away with what we saw. It was really small at the time. We met at the Opera House for the seminar, and we met a lot of people that we knew, a lot of my husband's former students. Some of them were already up there. And so we were just excited about everything. And so after it was, Kip asked us to stay over for another week. So we stayed another week, and that's when he asked us to come back and to live there, and said George could help with the missions program. So, but we were still hesitant, because when he retired, we had said we're never going to go to the north where it snowed and had snow and ice, or any big city where they had traffic on the freeways and everything. We were tired of that. And that was our criteria. But you should never say never. So we learned that. So anyway, we discussed it among ourselves and said, well, we told Kip we'd think about it for the next year. Maybe we would come. But meanwhile, we took a trip. We wanted to go see Paul McNeil, because he was one of the men that we knew very well when we were in the Northeast. He was in Schenectady when we planted the church in Schenectady. And so we really trusted his what he would say to us. So we took a trip. We stopped at Harding and asked the president and several of our friends there what they thought of our moving to Boston, beginning to get a little rumble, at that time. And then we went to Lipscomb, where I went to school. We asked the president and our friends there, Barney Moorhead and different ones, what they thought of our going there. They all thought it would be great. And then we went to Florida and talked to Paul McNeil at Clearwater. And he told us that we definitely should go. He said, George, every year you stay in Boston, it'll take a year off your life. He said you get a year younger. But he told us that what we saw was really it, that they definitely were. Missions was number one priority. Taking the world for Christ was number one priority. He said, what you see is exactly where their hearts are. And so we believed him. So we went back home and we called Kip and told him, what we'd like to do is to come to Boston for a week and just see everything that goes on firsthand. And so he invited us to come up in first 2 weeks of January. I guess he thought that if I got through the snow and ice then, we'd probably make it. So, which was true. And we stayed with the Gempels for 2 weeks and went to everything that they had. The elders meetings, the interns meetings, everything they did. And we saw that they really meant business, and that they really were planning the teams. Of course, most of the teams that we saw at that time did not go to the country that they were saying they were going to. Then they went to a different one, and didn't work out for them to go where they thought they were going. But we just and we borrowed the Gempel's car, and we drove over ice and I prayed, and I drove on the expressway, and I prayed. My prayer life when we moved there, my prayer life went way up, because I prayed every time I got in the car. But anyway, we said that probably we'd come in the fall, September of '84. Well, Pat Gempel called us, I think, I'm not exaggerating, I believe it was every day, saying she wanted us to come in May, that she needed me desperately to help her with the older women. Had a lot of older women in the church. And she said, you need to take over the north zone. Well, we didn't have zones in the north area. I want you to help me with these women. I can't be running back and forth all the time. And she just kept, after us. So